Well, greetings again, students. I wanted to model for you today the exercise, the attending exercise for this week, which is all about finding trouble in your text or in your story. This is especially helpful when you're looking at narratives, which most of you have been assigned, I guess, kind of gospel narratives. It's always interesting to look for trouble. One of the things that I mention about that is always be aware that trouble can come from a variety of places, that sometimes trouble comes to us because, there are enemies who just stir up trouble in our behalf, people who are working against us. Whether it's the enemy of our soul or just real human enemies, they can be the source of trouble. Very often we can create our own trouble, and we do because we humans tend to go our own way, not pay attention to God, move in directions that complicate life for us, and so we become the cause of some of our own trouble. But one of the things to me that's really interesting about Scripture is that quite often it's God who is introducing trouble into our lives by just stirring us up out of the ordinary and doing some things in surprising and unexpected ways that really stretch us and challenge us and ultimately will cause us to grow. And I think that that's really kind of the case in my text today, the one that I've been working with, of the disciples on the Emmaus Road. Now, I'm going to show you and try and talk you through my little chart here. And remember, because you've hopefully looked at the slides or the presentation that I gave you about trouble and finding trouble, is that most stories begin in just a normal world where things are going, and there's nothing really surprising about it. This is just the way life is. And then a good story will give you a hint that trouble is on the way. Something is going to be introduced that just says to you, ooh, that sounds like this could become very interesting, that life is going to get unsettled. Well, then trouble will arrive full blown, and that's kind of the heart of the story. Something goes wrong in life, and after that occurs, what we end up seeing next is either one of two plot lines that usually take place. One of those plot lines is we get help from the outside. Someone comes to help us out of our trouble and rescue us from the trouble, which is always a good thing. But also, you could draw an arrow downward and say that another way that trouble gets resolved in life is that we go through the trouble, we learn something about God, about ourselves, about the way life is, and in that learning, we get changed, and we make it through, and now we are new people. And so, whether you get help from outside or whether you learn something and are changed in the process, what ends up at the end of the plot line of trouble is that you're actually in some kind of a new resettled world. It's the new normal for you. And of course, that just is another opportunity to start this plot line all over again, which is really kind of the story of our lives. It's the story of the Bible, and certainly a way that we can interestingly plot and think about the stories that we're encountering as we do our work with these gospel texts. So I'm going to take this Emmaus Road experience and just walk you through what I see in each of these steps. It doesn't take very long to do. Uh, for me, the normal world is you've got these two people. I like to think of them as Mr. and Mrs. Cleopas, who are just on a journey back home to Emmaus. Luke tells us it's 7 miles from Jerusalem. We know they've been in Jerusalem for some very important reasons, all centered around what happens to Jesus at Passover week and and with his crucifixion and all. Um, but they are just returning home from their journey to Jerusalem. And there's nothing even interesting or all that significant about that until we come to the hint of trouble. I think for me, the hint of trouble begins that Luke tells us that Jesus actually comes up and starts walking with them on the road. And that would be very, very exciting. But here's the hint of trouble it says that their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And to me, that's where the trouble and the interest in this story really begins to pick up. I want to explore that a little bit. What is it that keeps their eyes from recognizing him? And why are their eyes being kept? And how is that even possible? And does that happen to me that very often in life I miss very significant Christ encounters because somehow my eyes are kept from recognizing him. Now, he asks them a question, and another one of the hints of trouble that occurs is when he asks them this question about what are the things that you're talking about. Luke tells us that they stood still and they were looking sad. And that is giving me a big, big clue about where the trouble is. Because when I dive right into this text and really get into the heart of it, read that dialogue of what they told him about what had gone on, they express some things that help me to know that the real trouble in this text is that these two people are blinded by their own grief and disappointment and despair over the things that have happened to their Lord. In fact, they speak three words that to me are three of the saddest words in the English language because they say to this stranger who is walking among them and asking them about what they've been talking about, after telling about all these stories of Jesus and then they had crucified him, they said to the stranger, "We had hoped that he would be the one." Boy, those three words, "we had hoped," which really kind of expresses we have no hope any longer. We are really in the throes, in the pit of discouragement and defeat and despair. And so, really, this hint of trouble, what has kept them from recognizing Jesus or anything that God is doing in the world right now, is just they are surrounded by their own and just entombed, if you will, themselves in their own grief and despair, I think expressed strongly in the words, "we had hoped." So it's really interesting to me that the trouble has come, and I guess you could say some of it's from the outside, maybe because of the enemies that did this to Jesus. But in real ways, the trouble has come because God, um, who had so set up their hopes that Jesus was the one, had really, really let them down. Now, what's interesting is the resolution to this particular trouble actually comes, I think, in kind of a combination of both things. It's interesting to me that they're getting help from the outside because the risen Christ is walking with them. And as he walks with them, he begins to open up the scriptures to them, to explain to them, beginning with the law and the prophets, how it was necessary for the Christ to go through these things. And he began to just open up the scriptures to them. And they say later on, their hearts were burning as he opened the scriptures to us. And then, of course, when he comes into their home and takes his place at the table and he breaks the bread and he goes through those very that Eucharistic pattern of motions where he took and he blessed and he broke and he gave. By narrating the story in that particular way, Luke is reminding us of something special that happens when bread is broken at the table of the Lord. And that what happened for them was their eyes were opened. And so, yes, they got help from outside because the risen Jesus had come interpreting the scriptures to them and revealing himself to them in the breaking of bread. But then they learned something as well because their hearts are burning, their eyes are opened, they're coming to a real awakening. Now, that leads us into a new world, a whole new world, their new normal, which is now living in light of the resurrection. The road that they travel on back to Jerusalem is no longer a road of sadness. It's no longer a road of despair. It's not a dead end street. It is now a road of joy and of victory, and they are announcing the good news. The Lord is risen indeed. And so they are now living in a whole new world that has been transformed by the appearance of Christ. But it's just interesting to me that this story kind of begins in trouble with their eyes being kept, that their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And then at the end of the story, how their eyes were open and Christ was made known in the breaking of bread. So that's simply it, how you walk through the plot line of trouble. And I'll look forward to seeing what you do with your text this week as you share in your attending exercise. Hope we all have a good one, and I'm going to do my best to catch up on your grading. Have a great week, gang, and I'll talk to you again next week for our last attending exercise.